Why are good people so deeply, almost impossibly, divided by politics and religion? Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into Jonathan Haidt's groundbreaking framework from The Righteous Mind, and we're going to bring it all the way up to the present day to see exactly how his theories are playing out in our modern, tech-driven world.
So here's the big question. Are our political and moral beliefs truly driven by logic, or are they just hardwired biological instinct? For centuries, we've loved to think of ourselves as these highly rational creatures. But Haidt's central premise challenges that traditional belief head-on. As we unpack his findings today, we're going to see exactly why our supposedly perfect, rational arguments almost always fail to change anyone's mind.
Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The central thesis. 2. The evolution of moral foundations theory, updated with the latest 2023 science. 3. Academic rebuttals. 4. The is versus ought conflict. And 5. Relevance in the digital age.
All right, let's dive straight into Section 1, the central thesis, also known as the elephant and the rider.
This brings us to, honestly, one of the most powerful metaphors in psychology. Picture your fast, automatic, unconscious intuition as a massive, lumbering elephant. And your slow, conscious, effortful reasoning, that's the tiny rider sitting on top. We usually think the rider is the one in charge, right? Steering the beast? But Haidt argues that's a total illusion. The elephant reacts intuitively to whatever's happening and just goes. The rider basically has no choice but to go along for the ride, acting more like a press secretary, desperately trying to invent an after-the-fact justification for whatever path the elephant already chose.
And that brings us to this absolutely crucial takeaway. Intuitions come first, strategic reasoning second. Think about the last time you argued politics with someone. You were probably just a rider talking to another rider. But if you actually want to change someone's mind, you have to talk to their elephant. You've got to appeal to those underlying emotional intuitions first, or your logical reasoning is literally just going to bounce right off them. Moving on to Section 2, the evolution of moral foundations theory and how we are updating the science.
So, if this giant elephant is driving, what exactly is it reacting to? Well, Haidt suggests our minds evolve specific moral taste receptors, kind of like the taste buds on your tongue. We've got care versus harm, which evolved from our need to protect vulnerable children, fairness versus cheating, rooted in reciprocal altruism, loyalty versus betrayal, which kept our ancient tribes cohesive, authority versus subversion, shaped by primate hierarchies, sanctity versus degradation, which originally kept us away from pathogens but grew into spiritual purity, and finally, liberty versus oppression, basically the urge to resist bullies. Research shows folks leaning left politically heavily rely on care, fairness, and liberty, while those leaning right tend to use all 6 foundations a bit more equally.
But here's where it gets really fascinating. The science didn't just stop back in 2012, when fairness was treated as one single foundation. Both the left and the right claimed they valued fairness, right? Yet they disagreed constantly on actual policies. So in a major 2023 update led by researcher Mohammed Atari, they actually split the Fairness Foundation in 2. It's now equality, meaning equal treatment and outcomes, which the left strongly endorses, and proportionality, the idea that you get rewarded based on your merit or effort, which the right strongly endorses. This split was a real game changer. It perfectly explains the modern ideological divide over wealth and social justice.
And the whole shebang is still evolving today. Researchers are looking into brand new candidate foundations, things like ownership, dealing with our snap judgments about property and territory, and honor, or kirit, which is all about reputation, protecting your family, and retaliating against insults, super prominent in Middle Eastern and other culture of honor societies. It just goes to show how incredibly diverse the human moral palette really is.
Okay, let's flip the script in Section 3, academic rebuttals. We are pushing back on pluralism.
Because look, a theory this massive doesn't just get a free pass in academia. Haidt's theory is pluralistic, meaning multiple, distinct moral taste buds. But then you have Kurt Gray's theory of dyadic morality. Gray argues, wait a second, morality isn't 6 different things. It literally all boils down to one single template, an agent causing harm to a patient. Basically harm. Even if someone gets upset over a supposedly harmless taboo, Gray's research shows our brains will automatically scramble to invent a victim. So the big debate right now is morality this complex pluralistic buffet, or is it really just variations of harm?
There's also a major philosophical critique from Lawrence Blom. See, Haidt argues conservatives have an advantage because they use binding foundations like loyalty and authority to hold society together, whereas he paints the left as heavily individualistic. Blum hits the nail on the head here, arguing this is a massive mischaracterization. The left absolutely has powerful binding values. They just look different.
Things like the welfare state, universal healthcare, or social security. Blum says those are profound, structural expressions of social solidarity and community care. He argues Haidt kind of ignores those left-wing institutions to make his elephant and rider theory fit a bit too neatly.
This takes us to Section 4, the is versus ought conflict, also known as the naturalistic fallacy.
We need to define a super important concept here, the naturalistic fallacy. This is the mistake of confusing descriptive psychology, what is or how people actually behave, with normative ethics, what ought to be or how people should behave. A lot of critics say Haidt steps right into this trap. He notes that conservatives use more moral foundations and kind of implies that having more foundations is inherently better for society. But philosophers are quick to wave a red flag, reminding us that just because a behavior is natural or evolved doesn't automatically mean it's morally good.
Which brings up a really tough question for us to ponder. Does the evolutionary success of traits like loyalty and sanctity make them morally right for us today? Utilitarian critics make a great point here. Sure, intense tribalism and in-group loyalty were absolutely crucial for our ancestors surviving in the wilderness, but does that mean those same primal instincts are the ethical way to run a highly diverse modern democracy? Just because we're biologically wired to favor our own tribe doesn't mean we ought to base our public policies on that instinct.
All right, let's bring it all home with Section 5, Relevance in the Digital Age, AI and Tribalism from 2024 to 2026.
So how does all this ancient psychology hold up right now? Well, it turns out our digital platforms are essentially giant machines explicitly built to weaponize our elephants. Social media hyperactivates our tribal psychology, just keeping us in this loop of constant outrage. And this has fueled something political scientists called Teflon leadership. In super-polarized communities, followers basically grant their leaders transgression credits. Because that us versus them narrative heavily triggers the loyalty and authority foundations, leaders can commit wild moral violations that completely bypass the care or fairness foundations entirely. Their base just excuses the behavior as a necessary defense of the tribe.
But here's where it gets absolutely wild. We are literally hard-coding these human moral biases right into large language models today. Recent data shows AI models have incredibly distinct moral profiles. For instance, OpenAI's GPT-4 scores super high on care, equality, and liberty, which perfectly mirrors typical weird academic values: Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Meanwhile, Anthropic's Claude leans way more into fairness and loyalty, probably because of its unique constitutional AI training. And open-source models like DeepSeek and Llama, they show highly variable, context-dependent morality. So our messy human mortal matrix isn't just polarizing us anymore, it's actively shaping the artificial intelligence that's going to govern our future.
So what does this all mean for us? Will we learn to talk to the elephant, or will the rider just continue to drive us apart? Haidt's work is ultimately a friendly, if urgent, warning. Human cooperation is fragile. If we keep attacking each other's rational riders while totally ignoring the emotional elephants in the room, our polarization is only going to get worse. We have to try and see the righteousness, the underlying moral foundations in the people we deeply disagree with. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I have a challenge for you. The very next time you find yourself in a heated debate, see if you can spot the elephant. Catch you next time.